Okay, I want to welcome everyone today to INCOMPAS's webinar on the outcome of the elections of 2020 and the impact that it will have on the broadband and tech industry. This has been a trying, challenging, exciting year. We've just had an election that had the highest turnout and participation of American voters since the 1890s. Over 65% of our nation voted. And now as we look at the power configuration in Washington, what we would like to do as a staff is kind of walk you through between now and the end of the year, the issues that we believe that will be addressed at the FCC and in Congress in the lame duck session and in the last months of this administration. And then as we look forward into the future, what is likely to be first up in the first 100 days of the next administration and the next Congress. So I want to welcome everyone. INCOMPAS, we're the founding voice of competition. We started in 1981. This coming year, we will celebrate our 40th anniversary. In February, we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the competitive constitution, the 1996 Telecom Act. So these are exciting times, and in many ways, I believe that we will see for the broadband industry coming out of COVID, one of the most transformational public policy periods in my lifetime and over the last 30 years. And since I've been working both as a congressional staff, as a member of Congress, and from the private sector and working with INCOMPAS these last 6 years, I think we have a transformational period of time before us. So what I'd like to do first is just kind of talk through the next 2 months and then the first 100 days of the next administration. We believe that there's a good chance, I don't know if I would say a probability yet, that we will see a COVID package that will be negotiated. And there'll be a number of provisions in the COVID package that would look at funding for the broadband industry. We feel if there is a CARES package that addresses the broadband funding that many of the states have adopted over the last 6 months to allow for deployment to give connectivity in those states. We think one of our priorities is getting that deadline of expending the funds or obligating the funds by the end of this year to be extended and delayed until December 31st of 2021. We feel that the House and the Senate are in agreement, and as long as there is a CARES bill that passes, that extension is a highly likely outcome and probability that we're all working toward, and we'll continue to keep all of you apprised of that. There's also the possibility of additional funding for the E-rate, Lifeline, and maybe telehealth programs. And we can discuss that, and we would welcome any questions that you might have. As we go into the next Congress, the next administration, it appears that the country has selected divided government, or a balance of power between the Senate and the new administration. We now know that there are 50 Republicans that have been reelected around the country, 2 outstanding races in Georgia that will be decided January the 5th. But even if the Republicans were to lose both of those seats, you would have equal representation, 50-50 in the Senate. Of course, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, would be the tie-breaking, but they would organize equally among staff and members of all the different committees. What does that mean? It means that we think that there will have to be areas of bipartisan consensus before anything moves in the Congress. If we're hoping for a more unified nation, I think that this is good news for the country, that it will force both parties to work together. And as we look at the priorities for the Biden administration in the first 100 days, we see 3 things that they're focusing on. The COVID relief, so additional relief initiatives that will be targeted to how do we get the vaccines out, how do we do the testing, and how do we begin the economic recovery coming out of COVID. So COVID, economic recovery, and then we believe that the next major initiative will be infrastructure bill that will be both traditional and will include a broadband component in the infrastructure bill. On the House side, Jim Clyburn introduced legislation in the last Congress that we think will be the starting point for the House going into the infrastructure bill. And there we have a commitment of $100 billion going to broadband. In the Senate, there's emerging bipartisan consensus commitment that after COVID, that there's now this new national commitment that broadband is essential, that broadband should be delivered to all Americans, every American in every place and part of the country. That is the new consensus that is coming out of COVID that I think is the transformational agreement for the country going forward and for our industry. And when you're looking at both RDOF, telehealth, E-rate, and a new infrastructure funding of up to anywhere from 65 billion to 100 billion, it really truly represents more funding than has ever been made available for broadband deployment in our lifetime. And it does signal this new commitment to building new networks, next gen networks, and INCOMPAS, through Angie's good work and her team, has authored something called the Broadband Blueprint that kind of lays out what we'll be advocating in those next 100 days. And as we go through the rest of the staff, as they look at what is to come and what INCOMPAS will be doing by the end of this year and going into next year, she'll have an opportunity to walk through that. That's a quick snapshot. The good news is that the election is over. Soon all the challenges will be complete. The certifications of the states will begin. We will have a peaceful transition to power. And I can say that it appears with a high number of votes, American democracy is strong, engagement is high, and the broadband commitment has never been greater. So those are the quick summations of where we are. And Angie, I'd love for you to add what you see coming in the next administration, what's to come at the FCC, and what is the outlook on that front?
Yeah, thank you, Chip. Before we do that, though, I wanted you to just weigh in a little bit on how you see the Congress addressing the government funding that's needed to keep the government open and operating. I understand there's a December 11th deadline that's looming. So what do you think about that? What's likely to happen?
So Senator McConnell has indicated that the Senate wants to take up COVID legislation, and they want to complete the 12 appropriation bills, possibly to combine that into something called an omnibus, where instead of passing one appropriation at a time, it is aggregated into one major big package. The House has already passed during the regular course of the last year 12 appropriation bills. The Senate did not, but the House and the Senate have been talking to each other. And we've been working with key members as they look at appropriations. There's no guarantee in this unpredictable period of time, but I do think that there's a institutional and congressional and bipartisan interest and self-interest, and even with a political interest in the Georgia races for both sides to get something done by that December 11th timeline. And so we'll be working very closely with key members on the appropriations and on the Commerce committees of both House and Senate to get our broadband priorities that we've been working with all of our member companies over the last year since we took the Keep America Connected pledge. And then we've been working along the different packages of COVID and with the FCC. We'll continue to do that as we go into the last of this year COVID package, lame duck package. And then as we go into what I hope will be an omnibus bill, because we'll have more opportunities to address priorities if it's done that way. The other fallback is to simply pass a continuing resolution. And the continuing resolution would give a flat level of appropriations of the past year without any policy priorities or any policy direction. So we're hopeful that we'll get an omnibus bill and a COVID package that address a lot of our priorities by the end of the year.
And as we look at the infrastructure package, Chip, you had mentioned Majority Whip Clyburn's legislation in the House that legislation is really beneficial to the overall broadband industry because it recognizes the need for more fiber deployment and that fiber to be driven more into areas that don't have access to that. Tell us, why is that fiber so important for the industry in terms of their investments and having this additional access to funding, how that's going to further the needs of Americans?
Well, as we, again, lessons learned from COVID, broadband connectivity, but also speed and capacity. As we shift to having to do online education, at-home healthcare, at-home work and commerce, then fiber really is what gives us the capacity and the speed for the present. And then for the future, why is it so important? Is that fiber will be the foundation of 5G. And so it gives us the ability, as we race against China, to be the first to 5G, and then all of the future applications, whether that's artificial intelligence or quantum computing or autonomous vehicles or telemedicine or precision agriculture. Fiber really will be the foundation, not only for the future network, but for the future applications that will ride on the top. So the Internet of Things, for example, all of those will be driven by having networks that only fiber can deliver the speed, the capacity for America to win the race competitively and internationally. And then as we try to get into underserved, low income, urban, rural communities, being able to have fiber combined with fixed and other wireless means, and as satellite low Earth orbiting deployments occur, we will have multiple platforms trying to reach much higher speeds and give connectivity to all parts and to every person in the country. So that funding is really going to be transformational, and you'll have a chance to talk a little bit, Angie. Many people are beginning to debate, should we reform the USF contribution system? Should it become part of the appropriations process? Should that be a national way of funding versus a fee-based, tax-based system that we've had going back to 1934? So these are the moments of inflection historically where you have, because of COVID, but the need for connectivity, the international race against China, that the country is coming together. They may be divided on many different things, but broadband connectivity really is uniting the country, all the members of Congress and the next commission around how do we get there as fast as possible, and how do we provide the resources and the funding and the policies that will streamline deployment so that we can reach the moment and meet the historical challenge.
In the current Congress, we've had significant interest, not just on the deployment of networks and the ability of Americans to afford access to those services over the networks, especially as we've been grappling with COVID this year. But we've also seen both parties interested in topics such as Section 230 of the Communications Act, which provides some legal protections to the online platform companies. We've seen, significant antitrust reports come out of the House Judiciary Committee that is suggesting significant changes to the antitrust standard. And then, of course, we've had continued interest in the need for privacy law to protect consumers. You had talked about the first 100 days, but Chip, do you think that the next Congress, kind of beyond the 100 days, right? What are the chances we'll see movement in those three areas of the law? Will there be agreement on modifications to Section 230? Will there be agreement on antitrust? And what are the chances of agreement on privacy?
And so kind of setting a historical context, and then as we look to the future. So the 1996 Telecom Act established Section 230, the liability protection that as online platforms allowed the posting of third-party content, that they would be protected by a liability shield. And they would also be given the ability to moderate illegal content and other content under certain categories, so that those private business platforms would be able to flourish, and you'd have to look back over the last 25 years and the emergence of Google and Facebook and Twitter and Amazon and Microsoft and all the other new startups and small and emerging internet companies, and then the use of websites and third-party content across the e-commerce from small to large. That is an amazing American success story. As we get to the next generation though of policy, and I believe in 2020 going into 2021, we're now in the next generation of internet policy. And Angie, what you mentioned is you look at, all right, is there a better way to create transparency and trust on how this third-party content is moderated, managed? What are the best practices? What are the standards? Can they show how the algorithms and the practices and decisions are made, so it creates a greater trust among all users and consumers? I do think that there's a chance that we will be successful in creating that type of transparency and trust framework on 230 in the next Congress. Privacy is another major area where I believe that both the companies and the consumers and a broad bipartisan leadership of the Congress wants to create a privacy and security framework. And if you look at both 230 and privacy, that is really the trust covenant or compact, as well as the competition compact going forward. And it'd be great for you and Lindsay to kind of walk through what we see on where we are on 230 today as the FCC is looking at a rulemaking. Does that survive? Does it go into the next administration or the next FCC, or is that something that I believe should be handled at the legislative and in the congressional area? And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but I do believe that on 230 and privacy, there are good opportunities to get bipartisan consensus for a new framework for the tech industry and for the consumers that need to be able to trust it, understand it, and to be able to go forward in a predictable, certain way economically, and for the investment and the innovation that will come. On antitrust, on changing the standard that has really been the driver of the last 50 years of antitrust and merger acquisition policy, which is the consumer welfare standard. I do think it will be very difficult to modernize and change that in the next Congress. And I think that's the most problematic or difficult to reach an agreement on. And I do believe that the standard is working today. And as we try to educate and inform why the consumer welfare standard is the best standard and what that means, there will be an ongoing debate, maybe without resolution in the near term, of why that standard is an enduring standard. And so we'll continue to work with all of our member companies on competition policy, antitrust policy, but the two likely places where we can reach agreement and see progress in the next Congress would be on 230 and privacy.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Chip, for your insights on what we're likely to see in the current lame duck Congress and into the new Congress next year and the following year. So we also wanted to just cover, we have many of our members who are active at the FCC. We wanted to describe what a transition looks like as we go into a new administration at the FCC. As you may be well aware, the FCC has a nominee pending in front of the Senate. Nathan Symington had his confirmation hearing just the other day. There were indications from the hearing that at least one Democratic senator, Senator Blumenthal, is interested in putting a hold on his nomination based upon his position on Section 230 and the pending petition that's at the FCC on Section 230 that Lindsay's going to cover in just a little bit as we talk. Whether he is successful in getting through the confirmation process before the new year is a big question mark. And Commissioner O'Reilly, who's currently sitting at the FCC, who essentially lost the job on his Section 230 petition this year, has announced that he will be leaving, by the end of the year. And under his terms requirements, he will be leaving at the end of the year. So potentially we are looking at a 2-2 split in January. But we would expect that Chairman Pai likely will resign just before the inauguration. And the last time that we had a change from a Republican administration to a Democratic administration, the Republican chair, Kevin Martin, resigned, just before inauguration happened. So we would not be surprised if we saw Chairman Pai do the same thing, which then would potentially leave us with a 2-1 commission at the beginning of the Biden administration. If the president-elect does not name one of the current sitting commissioners as chair, then we would expect that he would name one of them as acting chair. And what that means is the acting chair then can begin to do the things that a full chair person would do. This doesn't require, confirmation. By way of tradition, typically the senior commissioner is the one that's named acting. So in this situation, we would expect it would be acting chair, Jessica Rosenworcel. But potentially, she could be named full chair, just as Ajit Pai was 4 years ago. And if that's the case, then she would not have to go through a confirmation process to be full chair. We also would then, of course, anticipate, since the president gets 3 Democrats, we would anticipate that someone's either going to be nominated as full chair of the FCC for the Democratic position or as commissioner. And then, of course, if Nathan Symington's confirmation has not gone through, then the Senate Republicans would have an opportunity to potentially ask the Biden administration to nominate someone for O'Reilly's current position. So that person also could be named, and potentially the full chair and the new Republican commissioner nominee could go through the confirmation process together. And this is not all that uncommon to have nominees paired together. This then incents both parties to support each other's nominees through the process. So that's just something that you should keep an eye on. For an acting chair of the FCC, I think it's important to note that the acting chair position is an important one. And a lot of things can happen under the acting chair's role. And in the situation that we're in with COVID, and with Commissioner Rosenworcel in particular having been so outspoken about things that the commission should be doing right now to support COVID relief or connectivity, we can anticipate that she is going to want to look at opportunities that the commission could take to extend E-rate funding, for instance, to connect teachers and students who currently don't have broadband at home and are struggling to do their work when so many schools are still remote. We also can anticipate that she would look at the Lifeline program as potential opportunity for that kind of funding as well. And the pressure to do so, especially if Congress doesn't address the temporary COVID relief that's currently in the HEROES 2.0 package, which is a $12 billion fund for connectivity for schools. We would expect that there would be a lot of opportunity and pressure for her to try to address at least some of those issues through the current USF, E-rate, and Lifeline programs. The other thing that we wanted to note, let me just scroll down just a little bit, excuse me, is that there's significant impact on small businesses right now with respect to connectivity, both on the broadband side as well as on the traditional telecommunications side. And potentially there's opportunity for Congress to address some of those needs, but also for the FCC to play a bigger role here under a Democratic administration of ensuring that all small businesses that need the connectivity or need help maintaining connectivity, can get connected. So those are some of the things that I think you can see at the beginning of the FCC Biden administration, even under an acting chair role. I wanted to hand it off to Andrew, who's going to talk a little bit about, as we move further into the Biden administration, what things we may see on additional broadband and 5G issues from the Biden administration at the FCC. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Angie. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I just want to touch again on really what to expect on broadband and 5G policies from a Biden-led FCC. I think moving forward, ultimately, with the crisis and growing digital divide across our country and more reliance and dependence on internet becoming more apparent, I think we should expect the commission to continue what it's been doing and following the current Republican-led commission that's emphasized making broadband expansion a priority. So the focus will really remain particular on broadband deployment to rural areas and those underserved and unserved populations that really lack coverage overall. This is going to be a big push, I think, moving forward, no matter politics, and a very bipartisan effort. Second priority that we really see from a new FCC will be on broadband data and mapping. As we've seen the call from Senate Democrats and Commissioner Rosenworcel over the last year, as well as Commissioner Starks, I think there's going to be a continued push just for more granular, accurate broadband data and for improving mapping and usage so American taxpayer money is not being wasted. So we see that the FCC would still be implementing the Broadband Data Act, which has been a high priority of Commissioner Rosenworcel, but really now an opportunity for Democrats to shape broadband mapping and obtain additional information from providers. So there's a great likelihood that the FCC will be requesting more information from service providers, but such actions will probably need further review. Another area to highlight, I think, will be RDOF and C-band auctions. We don't really expect too many disruptions on these auctions. RDOF, as you all might be aware, is underway, and don't think it would be disrupted and will continue as is. Another issue would be the mobility fund. Chairman's intentions of ending that and moving to the 5G fund, where the FCC would allocate $9 billion from USF over 10 years through a reverse auction. So here's an opportunity for the Democrats, we believe, that they may not be able to fully implement completely, but an opportunity then for really to shape and have ideas for subsidizing 5G deployment efforts across the country. And then on the topic of 5G, we really see Spectrum continuing to be in the conversation, and Chip will probably have a further kind of his opinion on how things shape up with the government and the private sector. But we believe with the Biden administration really leading the FCC that we won't really see too many dramatic changes to spectrum policy, but rather the focus will remain on making new spectrum available for 5G services and deployments. So again, really the focus on getting additional attention to serving unserved and underserved areas and helping close the digital divide. So with that all said, INCOMPAS has really been a leader on pushing talk on broadband deployment. And as Chip had mentioned in his opening, we had worked on a thought paper called the Broadband Blueprint Map to really give policymakers from federal, state, and local level to give them solutions and policy ideas to how they can access federal funds and really attract private investment for broadband deployment. So I really encourage everyone that's on our webinar today to check our website. It has further information on this paper. I'll let Chip also kind of have his input a little bit on the 5G spectrum policy moving forward, the 12 gigahertz band, and where he sees any regulatory action from the FCC and Congress.
On the spectrum policy, we do hope to have an NPRM on 12 gigahertz. This is important to a number of our member companies like Dish, Radio Spectrum Group. This is also something that Dell Technologies has been promoting. And it does give an opportunity for a new entrant into wireless like Dish to have the spectrum that they need to really build out and to have a robust capacity. And as new entrants like radio spectrum group and on fixed wireless and fiber. We believe that this would give a lot of our member companies opportunities in both urban and rural markets. So we're working hard to get in the last months an NPRM, and we're cautiously optimistic that we will get an NPRM on 12 gigahertz. It will be announced for the open meeting in December. I do think in the next commission that not only getting new spectrum available, but greater spectrum sharing. The CBRS has shown that spectrum sharing and the technologies associated with making that possible, and with ORAN, are really emerging as ways to make spectrum use and allocation more efficient. And so we do believe for a lot of our technology as well as network companies, spectrum sharing will be something that the next commission will really emphasize, and you'll see greater gains and greater directions. I mean, a greater direction and emphasis on spectrum sharing.
Great, thank you so much, Chip and Andrew. I think it's really helpful. Believe it or not, we actually have a question in the Q&A box that gets to our very next topic that Lindsay was going to present, and that is, what about net neutrality? So I think you all know Democrats really support strong net neutrality policy, and the FCC have played a significant role in that during the Obama administration. So Lindsay, you want to cover that and then go right into Section 230 petition?
Sure.
Pending at the FCC?
Yeah. Thanks, Angie. So I appreciate whoever asked that question because you set me up perfectly to talk about net neutrality today. So we do expect on the net neutrality front that a new Democratic FCC will likely reinstate authority over broadband internet access service and to classify it as a telecom service subject to Title II with the previous forbearance that was granted in the 2015 Open Internet Order. And a reclassification to Title II would likely happen by the new FCC by granting a petition for reconsideration of the FCC's latest remand order, which classified bias service as a Title I service. So if this FCC moves forward, it would then likely need to issue a separate notice of proposed rulemaking that goes a step further from just reclassifying to also reinstating the net neutrality rules. And we think there will likely be pressure for the FCC this time around to go even further than the 2015 net neutrality rules to address issues like data caps and interconnection fees more directly, especially as we're seeing ISPs today implementing data caps more than ever, more than they have in the past, and as interconnection fees are rising. And both FCC Commissioners Rosenworcel and Starks are on the record for being supportive of net neutrality. So an acting Democratic chair could have the votes to reinstate net neutrality if Angie mentioned Chairman Pai leaves, Commissioner O'Reilly is gone by the end of the year, and if potentially Commissioner Symington's nomination does not go through, which would leave a 2-1 vote for the Democrats. And the remand order of the current FCC has not yet made it into the Federal Register, and that publication in the Register starts the 30-day timeline for someone to file a petition for reconsideration with the FCC. So based on this timing, it's looking less likely that Chairman Pai would be able to respond to a petition for recon, and so that this issue would instead be open for the acting chair to move forward on. So we think that this means that there could be action on the way sooner than what's expected on the net neutrality front. And just quickly to address the courts. So if a reclassification to Title II happens and was ever challenged in the courts, we think it would likely be upheld due to the DC Circuit's precedent on FCC deference for these issues. So the DC Circuit has given deference to both the Wheeler and Pai administrations under net neutrality, and we'd expect it to follow this precedent if a case ends up in front of them again. And also in the DC Circuit's latest decision in Mozilla versus FCC, it was a unanimous decision, but one concurring opinion did state that the judge believed the result was unhinged from the realities of modern broadband service. So we'd expect the DC Circuit to provide the FCC the same deference here and to agree that bias can be defined as a telecom service as it previously has. And quickly, just to move to the congressional front, if there is action at the FCC and possibly at the courts as well, then we think this could provide pressure for Congress to act on net neutrality. And last year, the House passed the Save the Internet Act to reinstate the net neutrality rules. But we could also see something like the legislation introduced by Congressman Kaufman that INCOMPAS endorsed a couple of years ago, which has a non-Title II approach. And Chip or Angie, I'll ask you, do you think there's a likelihood we could get a congressional solution and settlement on net neutrality this time around?
I'll let Chip go. I think.
I think that there is a higher possibility. I wouldn't say probability. And the reason I say there's a higher possibility that with a new FCC likely adopting a Title II approach, I think it could create momentum to have a congressional solution that really would provide long-term stability and certainty instead of changing it with every administration and having 4 changes of the last decade and net neutrality policy. Finally, having a permanent solution, a legislative solution. And so you could see all sides come together and have the self-interest, political interest to do so. I'm not predicting it yet, but it could be a possibility. And it could take, as we do major broadband legislation and funding, there will be many opportunities for this debate to come up and perhaps be settled. So the trade-off between broadband investment and funding with net neutrality and a new title that will settle it once and for all and permanently could have a lot of attraction to both sides of this debate. Angie, your prediction.
To you, Chip. As the former congressman, I feel like
I'm a little bit more
much better
optimistic.
sense of the pulse of Congress than Angie, who my highest position was working for a commissioner at the FCC.
Well, I'm a little bit more optimistic than most, but the Senate, if the House pushes something, and the Senate would agree at least on the same principles. And INCOMPAS has always been the leader on interconnection policy. We believe there are 2 doors to the internet, one at the end user and one at the point of connection, and both doors need to be open. And so interconnection is very critical for our member companies and for the streamers, as well as allowing the demand for the network usage to then benefit our broadband builders. Interconnection is really a key component. And in 2015, we were successful for the first time in having interconnection included in net neutrality policy formally. And then subsequently in mergers and acquisitions during that era that were also very critical. And as I look back 5 years ago at what interconnection policy did to then really have Netflix first, but then a whole range of streamers enter the market very successfully. And now the cable video market is changed forever. And so we want to maintain the success that we've seen in the streaming industry because it drives demand and business to our broadband builders, and the two are connected, and interconnection is the linchpin.
It is that, and I believe the data caps is really becoming more of a linchpin too. While we're sitting here talking, well, actually my son just finished school at 3:30, but he's been upstairs zooming in to school because today is one of his days that he's not at school. They're on a 50% schedule. It's really important that we're both able to be online at the same time doing two-way video streaming. And that as a family, we don't have to worry. We're fortunate. We happen to be served by 3 ISPs. So since there's more competition at our house, the fiber ISP that we use does not use data caps. So we don't have to worry about hitting a data cap. because I'm working at home and he's at school here at home 50% of the time. So I think that's really fortunate. And then with respect to interconnection, the ability of so many of the streaming video cloud companies, all of these applications that are riding over the network are really critical. But if they're each having to pay for, interconnection when they're carrying the traffic all the way to the large ISP, that could start to get, the ability of the large ISPs to then engage in discriminatory behavior and charging outrageous prices is fairly significant. And we're hearing that the market has changed since Pi withdrew jurisdiction over bias from the FCC. So, we've been hearing from members that interconnection prices are rising now, and that there's really no cost justification that's being made by the large ISPs who are engaging in that behavior. So I think it's ripe for the FCC to look at all of that again. And potentially, that could cause Congress to be interested in it if the FCC is looking at it too. So, all right, well, so shall we move on to Section 230 petition?
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you both for your input. That was really helpful. So now just moving over to another question mark issue of Section 230, just to quickly make sure we're all on the same page of where we currently are with Section 230, and then just quickly talk about where we're going. But as I'm sure many of you know, in May, the White House came out with an executive order on Section 230, which was a clear response from the Trump administration being concerned about President Trump's flags on his social media posts. And one of the things that the executive order did is that it told NTIA that it must file a petition for rulemaking with the FCC to clarify provisions of the statute. And in July, NTIA filed this petition for rulemaking with the FCC. So in mid-October, Chairman Pai came out with a statement saying that he plans to move forward with a rulemaking proceeding to clarify Section 230, though no NPRM has been voted on yet. And then a week later, the FCC's general counsel wrote a blog on why he believes the FCC has the authority to interpret Section 230. So with the new Democratic Commission, we think NTIA's petition will likely get denied, or it also has the potential to just sit at the FCC, because both Democratic commissioners have repeatedly said that the FCC should not be in the role of interpreting 230 or to be the president's speech police, which indicates that a new commission will likely not want to move forward with NTIA's petition. However, some people do think that the Democrats may want to keep the option open for an FCC to act on Section 230 in case there's no congressional agreement. So there are different perspectives on this issue. The commission could deny the petition, or as I said, it may just leave it open for the possibility of a future FCC action if Congress doesn't act. So if Chairman Pai wants to move forward with an NPRM, if Nathan Symington's nomination does not move forward, it would have to be an item on the December meeting, because as Angie said, Commissioner O'Reilly would have to vote on it, and he will be leaving by the end of the year. And we will know the December 10th FCC's open meeting agenda. This FCC puts out draft items 3 weeks beforehand. So anything that would be on the December open meeting, the key date to look out for would be November 19th. And this chairman also has a tradition to blog about those items the day before, so we would know by the 18th. But it's notable that Commissioner O'Reilly was specifically not renominated precisely for his concerns of the FCC's role in interpreting 230. But if Symington does get confirmed and Chairman Pai has the votes for the January 13th open meeting, we will see that draft item December 23rd and a likely blog the day before. But some more unknowns is that even if Chairman Pai can get the votes to move forward with an NPRM, the question then becomes, does an NPRM make it into the Federal Register before Chairman Pai leaves in order to set off the comment deadline? And even if that happens, a new FCC, once Chairman Pai leaves, does not have to act on the NPRM or even bring it to order, or it could have it go to order but deny it. So it's really, we're not quite sure what will happen there, but in all likelihood, if a new Democratic FCC wants to do something on Section 230, it would most likely want to start clean and not act on a Trump administration's petition. So again, lots of unknowns there.
Yeah. And I'll add just another
Yeah.
little twist to what you're saying, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Just the other day, House leadership and ENC sent the chairman a letter that said, okay, pens down on any controversial items, which we take to mean really partisan items. And this is a partisan issue. It's been the tradition that chairman, follow that request. It's not clear yet whether or not Chairman Pai will, but that is another twist to all of this, is that this particular issue clearly falls into a controversial partisan item that exactly what the House leadership was getting at, that the FCC should no longer be working on. That's not to say the FCC, shouldn't be just doing regular administrative things that they need to get done, right? And that people don't have a problem with in terms of it's not a partisan issue. But I thought I'd just throw that in as another potential twist on FCC process as we're looking at the current administration finishing up some of their agenda items. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. So I think next we have in the lineup, Chris Shipley was going to go over some really fun topics that I know many of you have been waiting to hear about: USF contribution reform, robocalls. So Chris.
Yes, thanks for breaking all that down, Lindsay, so that we didn't have to, particularly all the moving parts to Section 230, my goodness. We've talked a lot about the distributions side of universal service thus far and how that could really transform or be transformed in a new administration. But we wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the big question of whether or not USF contributions reform will be tackled in the next administration. And the reason why it's a big question mark is because it hasn't necessarily been tackled in any administration recently. And so, as you all know, in its current form, all telecommunications service providers and certain other providers of telecommunications service contribute to the Federal Universal Service Fund based on a percentage of their interstate and international end user telecommunications revenues. These costs, which are typically passed on to their subscribers, go to support, as we've discussed, the high cost fund, which is now the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, Lifeline, the Schools and Libraries Program, or E-Rate, the Rural Health Care Program, and then Commissioner Carr's Connected Care Pilot Program. And one reason why USF contribution reform is expected to be important is that the contributions factor has risen steadily, and I will say sharply, over the last few years as accessible revenues have declined despite sort of steady program commitments. The USF contributions factor for the fourth quarter of 2020 stands at 27.1%. And we've learned recently that the contribution factor is estimated for the first quarter of 2021 to go above 30% for the first time, 30.4%, with some adjustments scheduled to be made. So it leaves a lot of questions about whether or not reform efforts are likely. Reform efforts have not been and are not expected to be easy in a new administration. There are long-standing NPRMs and further notices that have not been addressed by the Commission seeking comment on what reform might look like. The Federal-State Joint Board, which has been tasked by the FCC with reviewing and suggesting reforms, has at different times over the last few administrations found itself at internal loggerheads over a solution. Under the Obama administration, the leadership of the board had indicated that it would be inappropriate for the board to adopt proposals until the 2015 Open Internet Order had been adjudicated by the courts, given the implications of reclassifying bias. And in 2019, the state members of the board recommended that the FCC adopt a connections-based assessment on residential services and an expanded revenues-based assessment on business services. Those proposals were rejected outright by the chair at the time, Commissioner O'Reilly. At a NARUC event earlier this week, we saw a debate between Commissioner O'Reilly and former acting chairperson and Commissioner Mignon Clyburn, which sort of laid out where the battle lines, will be drawn in the near future over contributions reform. Dems appear to have an interest in connections-based systems and expanding the base of accessible services. Republicans, on the other hand, seem more interested in addressing the rising contribution factor through general appropriations from Congress, which might be a tough slog at this point, given how Congress will be divided, or by policymakers trimming universal service spending. And so as we think about reform and what reform could look like, there are just a couple of critical issues that will bear watching over the next few months. First, what does reform look like? Can we find some consensus on what that's supposed to be? There are several options which have been floated, including expanding the revenue base. This includes assessing bias as well as other telecommunications and telecommunications services. We've seen some analysis from some of the firms that we work with indicating that a Democratic-led commission is likely to explore ways to broaden the contribution base to support USF initiatives. Other options include a connections-based system in which voice and broadband connections would be assessed a monthly contribution, and a numbers-based system under which each assigned North American numbering plan telephone number would be assessed. Second thing to keep in mind is, can there be a meeting of the minds with states that have started their own reform efforts? We're aware of at least 7 states that have taken a stab at reforms, with a connections-based approach being the most popular effort or selection and choice option at this point. And finally, I think it's important to consider a lot of what we've discussed today with respect to E-rate, Lifeline, the RDOF, and how distributions are going to be made in a new Congress, particularly in light of pandemic funding. Dems are pushing the FCC and Congress to expand E-rate funding in order to bridge the digital divide and close that homework gap. And a low-income program like Lifeline is nearly sure to experience increased participation during economically difficult times. And so whether the FCC or Congress takes up USF contributions reform, I think remains to be seen. However, INCOMPAS has joined an informal effort representing a diverse set of constituents to develop potential solutions and present those solutions to policymakers in the months ahead. So stay tuned. I think of all of the issues we've tackled so far, this is the one where there are answers, but you've seen the least movement over the last couple of administrations. So I think it'll be well worth watching. The other topic I wanted to bring up, and I wanted to bring it up quickly because we actually have a webinar coming up on this, is the item of robocalls. And I think I'm not anticipating that we'll see a whole lot of change with respect to the way in which the FCC and Congress is going about its business. First off, we have a bipartisan issue here. And one thing I have heard FCC staff members say is that when you have a bipartisan issue in an election year, you roll with it until you can't roll with it any longer. And so I would expect to see the FCC continue to stay engaged, particularly as it meets all of its obligations under the TRACE Act. The TRACE Act signed by Congress in December of 2019 with, I think it was nearly 24 proceedings and or reports required over the next 18 months. So we're going to continue to see items from the TRACE Act be incredibly important at the FCC through June of 2021. We expect the FCC to be incredibly active on meeting these requirements. This year alone, we've seen them establish a single traceback consortium at US Telecom. They're completing a proceeding on one-ring scams, and they're continuing to address when call blocking is appropriate and when safe harbors should apply. And then most importantly, they've set implementation of stir-shake and call authentication frameworks in motion. They've granted compliance extensions to this requirement and required robocall mitigation programs. I think you'll also continue to see enforcement to be an incredibly important aspect of what the Commission is doing on robocalls. But I wanted to invite everyone specifically, for those of you that are interested in this topic, INCOMPAS will be hosting a webinar on TRACE Act compliance with Steve Augustino, who is a partner at Kelly Dry, and with Lavinia Kennedy, which is TNS's Director of Robocall Detection, next Thursday, November 17th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be moderating that discussion, and I think it really should provide a lot of good detail about what the future of robocalls is going to look like in the near future. Angie?
And Chris, let me just say that you are the robocall master, and we appreciate greatly all your work with all of our members over the past years. And I like your music. You know, you two and Pearl Jam have to be two of the best bands ever. And the last thing, I want everybody that is listening or watching, Chris is a Notre Dame grad and fan, and we want to congratulate the Irish on defeating Clemson. Rare achievement.
Never thought I would see it.
Yes, thank you so much, Chris. You're like the happiest man in broadband. So that's the new title that I really think that we should go with to describe Mr. Chris Shipley.
Yeah,
So
The moniker I wear with pride.
Yeah, Chris did not storm the field, but he did run around the block a couple times.
Oh, for sure. I was out there.
Yeah, great. All right, so I see we're almost out of time. I was looking at the question box. I think we've addressed all the questions we've received so far. So I thought I would take just a few moments before Chip closes us out, if you don't mind being patient, just noting that as it's really important to think through how the FCC's competition policy may be viewed under the Biden administration. So there has been a debate going on at the FCC about how to define broadband in terms of the product markets. And the Democrats have generally wanted to keep separate the mobile from the fixed broadband markets. That is something that Encompass supports. We see consumers still accessing both and needing them for different reasons. And that is a debate that I think you may continue to see the industry have, but that you would see an FCC continue to define those product markets separately. I also think there will be some skepticism by the FCC on any very large ISP mergers in the future. We saw that during the Wheeler administration. The Comcast Time Warner Cable merger was denied. That is something that Encompass led on, and there are concerns about the ability of large ISPs to use their market power to hurt our small ISPs positions. So I would think that we'd continue to see a lot of scrutiny of very large ISP mergers. And similarly in the wireless industry, on the mobile broadband and mobile voice side, we would expect there would be scrutiny of any further consolidation of the large wireless providers. Of course, these are topics that the Commission regularly reports on now. Every other year, the Commission does a report on the state of the marketplace for competition purposes, both from the fixed and the mobile perspective. That report is due this year. We commented on it, so it'll be interesting to see if the current administration gets that report out the door before the Biden administration takes over towards the end of January. So stay tuned on that. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you got a taste of the really great policy team that I get to work with every day. They are amazing people, work really hard, and we also have a lot of fun, as you can tell. But I'm going to hand it off to Chip, who's going to close us out today. Thanks, Chip.
Well, thanks, Angie, and thanks for all the Encompass team and for our members. As we close the year, and as we go into the 25th anniversary of the Telecom Act and the 40th anniversary of the founding of Encompass and being the founding of competition policy, I think we have lots of challenges, but we have more opportunities than I can remember in a very long time. We have created an effective, cohesive team of staff and a very effective and cohesive membership engaged and very effective in telling the story and making a difference both in Congress and the Commission. So we want y'all to continue to be engaged as we go forward. We do think that the configuration of power with the likely Republican majority and Senator Wicker as chair of the Senate Commerce Committee from my home state, the relationships we have in the House with on a bipartisan basis, but with Congressman Doyle Anna Eshu, Chairman Pallone, and others, that we'll have a chance to really have your voice in the midst of a policy period that I think will be more productive than any time in the last 2 decades. And then with the commission, we believe looking at competition policy in a way that can really help our member companies, that we have great opportunities, and we look forward to the end of this year and going into next year. And we appreciate everything everyone has done through COVID to keep America connected and to tell your story. And we look forward to building out broadband everywhere to all Americans in the next years.
Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate you joining us. And just as a reminder, you can check out our website for all of our upcoming webinars. There's 2 next week, one on the Broadband Blueprint paper, and then also the one that Chris mentioned on robocalls. So we hope that you will stay tuned. And if you're interested in INCOMPAS membership, please reach out to me or Julia Stroud. We would love to work with as many industry players as possible as we move into the Biden administration. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.